Every genius begins with a wound they can't ignore. It doesn't always bleed, but it never heals. It hides behind the calm face, behind the polite smile, behind
We
the
are
eyes that
waiting
seem
for
to see
you in the
more than they should.
darkness.
The world looks back at them like a
Join us.
fractured mirror, distorted, beautiful, but broken in ways most never notice. They try to fit in, to dim their light so others won't flinch, but the mind has its own rhythm, its own storms. And when it begins to turn, it reflects everything too deeply. Every silence, every lie, every flicker of meaning in the mundane. To be truly awake is to never see the world the same way again. It's not a gift, not at first. It's a curse that whispers questions no one else dares to ask. And once you've heard them, you can never unhear them. Thinking for them is not a habit, it's fire. It burns quietly at first, then consumes. They analyze, dissect, overthink until the simplest moments become oceans of meaning. A glance, a pause, a sigh, it all carries weight. Most people float across the surface of life, but the thinker sinks, searching for truth in the depths where no one else looks. And down there, it's dark. It's lonely. Because once your mind starts seeing patterns in everything, you realize how few people see them too. You try to explain, but language fails. Others call it too much. But you know it's not too much, it's just real. The price of understanding is isolation. Yet even in that solitude, the fire doesn't fade. It becomes the only companion left. The thought itself, the endless flicker of curiosity that refuses to die. Plato once said that madness, when it comes from the gods, is not a curse but a blessing. In his dialogues, he wrote of divine madness, the strange, sacred frenzy that seizes poets, lovers, prophets, and philosophers alike. He believed that the highest form of inspiration is not born from logic, but from a kind of sacred chaos, a touch of madness that lifts the mind beyond the ordinary. To him, reason could only take you so far. To touch truth itself, you had to lose yourself for a moment, to let the soul wander where the mind dares not go. In that light, what we call insanity might just be a higher form of order, one that the normal eye cannot perceive. Plato's warning wasn't to avoid madness, but to understand it, to honor it as the birthplace of beauty and genius. For in that thin space between clarity and chaos, the human spirit creates its most timeless art. But every vision has its price. The same mind that sees deeper also feels deeper. To notice everything is to be haunted by it. You sense the cracks in people's words, the pain behind their laughter, the quiet desperation in crowds. You try to carry it all, every hidden truth, every unspoken sorrow, until it becomes too heavy to bear. The world calls you distant, detached, maybe even cold, but it's only because you've seen too much. You begin to crave silence, not because you dislike people, but because their noise drowns your thoughts. Loneliness doesn't arrive as emptiness. It arrives as clarity, the awareness that few will ever see the world as you do. And yet, there's a strange comfort in it, because that loneliness, painful as it is, becomes the soil where something rare begins to grow: vision. Some minds shine so brightly that the world mistakes them for fire. They move through life half alive and half dreaming, too sensitive for the noise, too awake for the illusion. They see beauty where others see nothing, and horror where others look away. Society calls them geniuses, sometimes lunatics, sometimes both. But perhaps the line between the two was never real. Maybe the only difference is endurance. The ability to stand the heat of one's own thoughts without burning alive. Genius is not about intelligence. It's about intensity. It's the refusal to look away when the truth hurts. But that same light that illuminates can also blind. Sooner or later, every brilliant mind must ask itself, is it the gift that makes you different or the curse? And in that question lies the eternal tension. The beautiful, unbearable truth of being a mind too bright for the world. Plato believed that not all madness was something to be feared. In Phaedrus, he described a kind of madness that did not come from sickness or imbalance, but from the gods themselves. He called it divine madness, a force that visits certain souls, not to destroy them, but to awaken them. To Plato, reason could only reach what was human, but madness could touch what was divine. The rational mind follows patterns. The inspired one breaks them. Madness, when it comes from a higher source, is not a fall from sanity. It's a climb beyond it. It's as if the soul, tired of earthly order, opens a hidden door to the eternal. Those who walk through it may never return the same, but they glimpse truths the ordinary mind can't see. And that glimpse, that fleeting contact with the infinite, becomes both their power and their burden. The first kind of divine madness Plato spoke of was the madness of prophecy. It is the madness of those who see before others do. The seers, the mystics, the visionaries who feel the invisible currents shaping the world. This madness does not come from the mind. It comes from the spirit. It's a kind of inner tuning, like an antenna, catching whispers from beyond reason. Prophets often appear unstable, not because they are wrong, but because the world they perceive is larger than what others are ready to believe. Their words sound strange, their visions unsettling, yet time often proves them right. It's not intelligence that gives them sight, it's surrender. They let go of logic and become instruments for something unseen. But this gift is double-edged. Those who see too far often suffer for it. The world calls them mad because it cannot yet see what they already know. And that isolation, that unbearable clarity, begins to transform into something deeper. From that transformation comes the second madness, the madness of purification. Plato saw suffering as a kind of fire that burns away illusion. To the ordinary person, pain feels like punishment, but to the awakened, it's the soul's way of cleansing itself. Every trial, every heartbreak, every failure is a spiritual furnace, reducing the self to its essence. This madness often begins as despair, the collapse of everything familiar. But when the old self finally breaks, what remains is purer, quieter, and strangely free. It's the kind of madness that comes when a person stops resisting their pain and begins to see through it. The genius, the philosopher, the artist, they all walk this path. Their chaos isn't random, it's refining them. Through loss, they learn vision. Through emptiness, they learn truth. Suffering becomes sacred when it opens the soul to wisdom. And from that wisdom, something new begins to stir. A creative madness unlike any other. That is the third kind, the madness of poetry. Plato described poets as people possessed, not by reason, but by divine inspiration. The artist becomes a vessel, speaking words they themselves barely understand. It's as if another voice moves through them, using their hands, their heart, their pain as instruments. True art, in Plato's eyes, was not crafted, it was channeled. The poet, the musician, the dreamer. They surrender control and let the current of inspiration flow through them. But such surrender comes with risk. The line between creation and destruction blurs. To write, to paint, to compose under that spell is to give a piece of yourself away. The madness of poetry is intoxicating, ecstasy and exhaustion in the same breath. It consumes, yet creates. And perhaps that's why so many artists live at the edge of sanity. Their brilliance born from the very force that threatens to undo them. But there is one madness even more powerful than inspiration, one that swallows all the others whole. The last and most dangerous is the madness of love. To Plato, love was not simply emotion, it was divine possession. It drives the soul toward beauty, toward truth, toward unity with something greater than itself. But in doing so, it breaks every boundary. Love rearranges the mind. It makes the saint act foolish and the proud kneel. It dissolves the self, piece by piece, until only longing remains. Yet that longing is holy. In the Phaedrus, Plato described love as the madness that reminds the soul of its divine origin. When we fall in love, we glimpse perfection through another being, and that memory both heals and torments us. The lover becomes a mirror, reflecting our highest self and our deepest void. That's why love can feel like both salvation and suffering. It pulls the soul upward even as it tears it apart. Every genius who ever created something timeless has felt this madness. It is love that makes them reach beyond logic, beyond safety, towards something immortal. And it is love, too, that leaves them undone. For in Plato's world, the greatest madness is not to lose your mind, but to lose yourself in something worth dying for. The human mind is a miracle that doesn't know how to stop. It was built to protect us, to predict, to calculate, but somewhere along the way, it began to overclock itself. Every thought breeds 10 more. Every possibility becomes a maze. Neuroscience calls it hyperconnectivity, an overactive network of neurons that never rests. The brain starts looping, analyzing, simulating reality, even when there's no threat. It's like running a supercomputer on feelings. You feel everything all at once. The present moment becomes impossible to inhabit because your mind keeps reaching forward and backward, trying to solve existence itself. Sleep doesn't silence it. Meditation only slows it for a while. And when the world quiets down, your thoughts get louder. It's not madness, it's sensitivity tuned too high. The overclocked mind burns bright, but every light that burns too hot eventually starts to flicker. And in that flicker, the first shadow of isolation begins to appear. The more you see, the lonelier you become. It's an invisible kind of solitude, the kind that grows in the space between what you notice and what others ignore. You start to realize how much of life runs on illusion, on polite lies, on surface meanings. You listen to conversations and feel like an outsider, not because you don't understand, but because you understand too well. Insight becomes exile. You notice the cracks in people's smiles, the emptiness behind ambition, the quiet fear in those chasing pleasure. It's like waking up in a theater while everyone else is still inside the play. You can't go back to pretending. You can't unsee the truth. And so you drift, not away from people, but beyond them. It's not arrogance, it's ache. You crave someone who can see the world with that same unbearable clarity. But very few can. And so, awareness becomes a quiet curse, a kind of emotional exile that even words can't bridge. That pain, the pain of consciousness, is what Schopenhauer understood better than anyone. Arthur Schopenhauer called intellect both the light of the world and the source of its deepest suffering. To him, consciousness wasn't a blessing, it was a wound. The more aware we become, the more we realize the futility of our desires. He believed that life itself is driven by an endless will to survive, to strive, to chase what can never be fully attained. And the more intelligent a person is, the more clearly they see this pattern and the harder it becomes to bear. Ordinary minds can live in illusion, but the thinking mind sees through it, and what it finds is often despair. Yet, within that despair lies a strange kind of purity. Schopenhauer didn't glorify pain, but he recognized it as the birthplace of wisdom. The genius suffers not because he is weak, but because he perceives too clearly. He cannot lie to himself, and that honesty isolates him. But for those who survive it, suffering becomes a form of depth, a doorway into understanding. Some fall into bitterness. Others, like Nietzsche, take that suffering and set it on fire. Friedrich Nietzsche's descent was both tragedy and transformation. He looked into the abyss and found himself staring back. For Nietzsche, madness was not the opposite of reason. It was its evolution. He believed that when the mind pushes too far beyond convention, it begins to fragment, shedding everything false until only raw truth remains. But the process is brutal. His life was a slow unraveling, a collapse of body, mind, and identity. Yet from that collapse emerged something transcendent. Out of illness came insight. Out of isolation came his idea of the Übermensch, the human being who creates meaning from chaos. Nietzsche's spiral shows that sometimes breakdown is a form of metamorphosis. Madness, for him, was the bridge between what is and what could be. He lost himself to find something greater. And that loss, the surrender of the familiar self, is where the mind truly meets its edge. But the one who understood how to navigate that edge and survive was Carl Jung. Carl Jung believed that every person carries within them a shadow, the unseen, repressed part of the psyche that holds everything we fear, deny, or refuse to face. To him, genius was not about intellect, but integration. Sanity, he said, depends on one's ability to confront the unconscious without being devoured by it. When you enter your own darkness, your anger, your lust, your envy, your pain, you stand before the archetypes of your soul, the hero, the trickster, the child, the divine. Jung called dreams the language of that hidden world. In dreams, the unconscious speaks, weaving symbols that the rational mind cannot decode. Those who listen too closely risk crossing the thin line between mysticism and madness. But that's where transformation happens. To embrace the shadow is to reclaim the lost fragments of the self. It's a descent into divine chaos, a meeting with the gods inside your own mind. Jung taught that those who dare to face this chaos don't lose their sanity. They expand it. For the line between madness and genius was never meant to divide. It was meant to reveal. There's a kind of noise that doesn't come from the outside world. It hums beneath thought, beneath language, a storm that never fully quiets. For the deeply aware, the mind becomes a battlefield of impressions, ideas, and sensations that never stop colliding. Every silence becomes loud. Every still moment fills with questions. The genius isn't just thinking. He's feeling thought. He senses patterns in emotion, weight in words, meaning in every glance. What most people can ignore, he cannot. His own awareness becomes an echo chamber. He wakes up with thoughts already in motion and goes to bed carrying unfinished worlds in his head. Rest becomes impossible because creation never sleeps. He both loves and resents this awareness, because while it gives him depth, it also traps him inside a mind that refuses to stop observing. And that's when he begins to live two lives, one seen and one hidden beneath the noise. In public, he appears calm, composed, maybe even ordinary. But inside, he's somewhere else entirely, floating between two dimensions of existence. One part of him performs the rituals of daily life: conversation, work, politeness, survival. The other part watches it all from above, detached, quietly analyzing everything as if it were happening to someone else. He is both participant and observer, human and ghost. That split becomes his secret burden. He can see beauty and absurdity coexisting in everything. How fragile people are, how strange society's illusions appear once you've seen through them. Yet he cannot fully return to ignorance, nor can he escape his human needs. The genius lives between two worlds: the ordinary, which feels too small, and the transcendent, which feels too vast. And the only way to bridge that gap, to keep from being torn in half, is to pour the chaos somewhere, to make it visible. That's where creation begins. Creation, for the genius, is not a choice. It's survival. When a mind becomes too full, art becomes an exorcism, a way to release what words cannot contain. Every sentence, every stroke, every note is a confession disguised as beauty. It's how the thinker empties the noise, how he makes sense of what the world refuses to see. Most people think creativity is about expression. For him, it's about escape. Without it, he would drown in his own intensity. That's why true art often feels haunted, because it is. It's the residue of pain turned into meaning. When the genius creates, he isn't trying to impress or succeed. He's trying to survive the flood within. But exorcisms are never painless. Every creation takes something from him. Every masterpiece drains a little more life, until what remains is fragile and raw. And when the art no longer silences the noise, when even creation fails to contain the storm, the collapse begins. The collapse doesn't happen all at once. It starts with small fractures, fatigue that doesn't fade, silence that feels heavier than before. The world begins to blur. Things once clear start to lose meaning. Sleep becomes a battleground, thoughts overlapping until reality itself feels thin. The genius begins to question not the world, but his own mind. Is this insight or illness? He can no longer tell. The very mind that once gave him vision now becomes his enemy, replaying doubts and memories until he feels trapped inside his own skull. Some call it burnout, others madness. But for him, it feels like disintegration, the moment the mirror cracks and every reflection turns against him. The self he built through brilliance begins to crumble. He withdraws, hides, disappears. And yet, even in that darkness, something stirs. The collapse, painful as it is, becomes the soil of something new. Because before resurrection, there must always be ruin. Resurrection doesn't arrive with clarity or joy. It begins quietly, in surrender. The genius stops fighting the noise. He stops trying to understand everything and finally lets the mind breathe. Out of exhaustion comes acceptance. Out of madness comes stillness. In that stillness, something changes. The same intensity that once destroyed him becomes his strength. He learns to work with his chaos, not against it. He no longer seeks to control every thought, but to listen to them as if they were visitors, not enemies. Slowly, the pieces rearrange. Insight returns, but softer now, less violent, more compassionate. He sees that his gift was never meant to be conquered. It was meant to be harmonized. From breakdown comes a kind of wisdom that no philosophy can teach. The realization that creation and destruction are not opposites but partners. The fire that burned him is the same fire that now illuminates his path. He rises, not as who he was, but as something reborn, someone who understands that genius and madness were never two separate forces, but one continuous flame. We live in a world that celebrates comfort but fears depth. Everything around us is designed to distract us from ourselves. The moment silence enters the room, we reach for a screen, a scroll, a song, anything to escape the sound of our own mind. We've built an entire culture that mistakes stimulation for meaning. We crave constant motion, not because we love progress, but because stillness feels unbearable. It reminds us of what we've buried, our doubts, our sadness, our hunger for something real. Depth is no longer fashionable. People are encouraged to be efficient, not thoughtful. Emotions are labeled as weaknesses, sensitivity as fragility. Passion is tolerated only when it's productive. We praise control, composure, and calm, but secretly we envy those who live with wildness in their eyes, the ones who still burn for something invisible. Because deep down, we all know the truth. The people who feel the most are the ones truly alive. Yet our world is terrified of them. It fears intensity because intensity cannot be managed. It fears obsession because obsession can't be monetized. It fears madness because madness can't be controlled. So society teaches us to dull ourselves, stay reasonable, stay calm, stay useful. But in doing so, we lose something sacred. We forget that every great leap of humanity, every work of art, every discovery, every revolution, was born from someone who refused to stay within the boundaries of what was normal. Without madness, there is no genius. Without depth, there's no soul. And so, quietly, beneath the noise of everyday life, there are people who still feel it, the pull towards something deeper. Maybe you're one of them. Maybe you've always known that you don't quite fit. You look around and wonder how others move so easily through life, so unbothered, so sure. You notice patterns in everything. The way people speak, the moods that linger in rooms, the strange symmetry between beauty and suffering. You're not trying to be different. You just are. You feel like your mind is tuned to a slightly different frequency, one that catches whispers others can't hear. You sense meaning in places others overlook. And sometimes it hurts, because awareness can be a form of isolation. You see too much, feel too much, understand too deeply what others dismiss. You start to think something must be wrong with you. But it isn't wrongness, it's refinement. It's vision. The hidden geniuses of this world rarely recognize themselves because they confuse their sensitivity for weakness. They think they're too emotional, too introspective, too complicated. But those are the very traits that make them powerful. They're the ones who carry the world's empathy, who see beauty even in pain. Their loneliness is not a flaw. It's the cost of seeing clearly in a fogged world. The truth is, people who feel deeply are not broken. They're awake. And to be awake in a sleeping world will always be a little lonely. But it's also what allows you to see wonder where others see nothing at all. The challenge, though, is learning to stay sane in a world that thrives on madness of a different kind, the external kind. A world addicted to chaos, to productivity, to noise. The real madness isn't in those who think too deeply. It's in those who've stopped thinking altogether. To remain calm while awake, to hold your vision without being consumed by it, that is the real art. It begins with gentleness, a kind of inner patience with your own mind. You can't fight your thoughts forever. You can't cage intensity. You can only guide it. Let it move through you instead of against you. Write, paint, walk at night. Let the mind speak, but don't let it dictate. Balance isn't found through control. It's found through understanding. You are not your thoughts. You are the sky that holds them. The storms pass. The silence remains. Most people think peace comes from numbing the mind, but true peace comes from befriending it. You don't have to suppress your sensitivity. You just have to ground it. Feel deeply, but also rest deeply. Dream, but also breathe. When you begin to accept your own contradictions, the noise softens. You realize that sanity isn't about being calm all the time. It's about learning how to dance with your chaos. And from that dance comes something close to wisdom. Plato called that wisdom divine madness. He believed that madness, when it comes from the soul, is not sickness but awakening. It's the language of the divine speaking through the cracks of reason. He wrote that the greatest forms of human inspiration, prophecy, poetry, love, are all forms of sacred madness. They are states in which the human spirit touches something eternal, something just beyond the edge of comprehension. Think of the poet who loses sleep chasing the perfect line, the lover who risks everything for a feeling they can't name, the philosopher who questions the foundations of existence. To the rational eye, they all look unhinged. But to Plato, they were closest to truth. Because in that fevered search for meaning, in that surrender to beauty, the soul remembers its origin, the divine spark inside us, the same spark that makes us create, love, question, and dream, is madness disguised as grace. It's the reason we're drawn to mystery, the reason music can make us cry, the reason we stare at stars and feel both infinite and small. Madness, in Plato's sense, isn't chaos, it's longing. It's the soul reaching toward what it once knew. And though it hurts to feel it, it's also the most honest thing we'll ever experience. That longing keeps us human. It keeps us humble. It reminds us that beyond our intellect and logic, there is still something sacred pulsing beneath, the heartbeat of the infinite. Maybe that's what genius truly is. Not perfection, not certainty, but aliveness. The capacity to feel the entire spectrum of existence without turning away. To let both light and darkness coexist inside you without breaking. The geniuses of history weren't necessarily the smartest. They were the ones who dared to remain awake. Awake enough to see the absurdity of the world, and yet tender enough to still find beauty in it. And perhaps that's all we're asked to do, to stay awake, to notice, to keep our hearts open even when it hurts, to see through illusion without losing faith in wonder. Because one day, when all the noise fades, when the screens go dark and the world grows quiet, you'll be left with just yourself. And in that stillness, you might finally realize that the very thing you spent years trying to suppress, your sensitivity, your madness, your depth, was never your enemy. It was your soul, knocking, waiting to be heard. So when the world calls you too much, smile softly. Let it. The world needs your too muchness. It needs your questions, your imagination, your quiet fire. You were not born to fit into a system designed to keep people asleep. You were born to remind them what it means to be alive. And maybe, in the end, that's what divine madness really means, to feel the full weight of existence, to see its beauty and its pain, and still choose to love it anyway. To look at the chaos of being human and whisper, yes, I'll stay. Because genius was never about being right. It was never about brilliance or perfection. It was about courage, the courage to stay awake in a world that dreams too much. So tonight, when the noise fades and you find yourself alone with your thoughts, don't rush to quiet them. Listen, somewhere inside that chaos is a voice, ancient and soft, reminding you of who you are. Not a mistake, not a misfit, but a messenger, a bearer of the divine madness that has kept humanity alive, curious, and reaching for eternity since the beginning of time. And in that moment, as you sit in silence with the pulse of your own mind, you'll understand what the philosophers, the poets, and the madmen always knew. Sanity was never the goal. The goal was to feel life completely, to let it move through you like light through glass, to burn without turning to ash. And when you do, you'll finally see you were never lost. You were simply becoming.